Mr. Mitchell, I'd like to talk about partnering, particularly in AGON, but also about partnering with Balanchine. Could you talk to me about what you felt was different about partnering in AGON in relationship to other Balanchine ballets and about partnering in Balanchine?
Well, I'd say number one, partnering in AGON, that Mr. Balanchine, it really taught me a wonderful sense of how to partner. And Mr. Balanchine always would say we should take social dancing because we forget to use the fingers to make the ballerina aware. And rather than grabbing and clutching, that I can take your hand and just with let you rest, but a little pressure from my finger. Or like holding, not this so the wrists are loose, but putting one finger or two fingers so the line is continued. But at the same time, you're always being able to this so that the hand is resting like on a bar and I am presenting you. He's always saying present, present, and show off the woman. And I think what happens is a lot of male dancers, they are involved with doing the presentation of themselves rather than presenting the woman. And when you're on stage dancing with a woman, no male can take the show away from a woman. In AGON, you're in all kinds of positions. You're lying on the floor, you're upside down. And so you have to know your center, but at the same time, the arm is like the bar that is the support. And one of the things is that, that I learned from Mr. B is that I tell the women, never grab me. Let me, so that if you need support, I can give it. But if you're already clutching, I'm sending to you a message that there's tension, there's something wrong. So you get tense. But this way, if I just hold it very lightly. But this came also from the fact of Mr. B and also taking adagio classes all the time. Even, I remember Jacques and I, when we were dancing in the company, we'd always go take adagio class because that partnering, there's a wonderful pleasure that you get knowing that you are the support, not in competition with, but supporting. And I think in AGON, you have it in all kinds of positions, like when the gentleman must go, it's a hinge, which is a contraction, really dropping to the knee, and it's the momentum of pulling the young lady over, getting her legs back close to herself so she can stand on her foot. What happens is that many male dancers, they know what they're supposed to do, but they don't know what the woman is doing.
That's a good point.
And so it's very important to know what she's doing. And one of the things I learned from Mr. Balanchine, he would get up and do both parts.
I was going to say, did he demonstrate all of AGON to you? I mean, I can't imagine what it was learning it if you had never seen it. Now we know what it's going to look like, but it's so convoluted and acrobatic. Did he actually fold up with his knee to somebody's thigh or stomach? How did he transfer it to your bodies?
He would do, within a certain sense, the concept of the movement. I mean, he wouldn't actually do the contraction and the knee drop, but he said, oh no, I want you to go down. But this is where, having studied all the different sciences of dance, modern dance, jazz, tap, I knew not to stick my backside out. I knew to do a contraction. Working with him, and also I think it was the musicality and the rhythm. Because some dancers, they want to know what the step is. He says, I don't know, I haven't done it yet. But he was so musical, and he would play and then the step evolved. Rather than saying it's glissade, jeté, there's no name for it. And so there's a trust. But the trust in him, then that allowed me to have the trust from the female.
Nonetheless, I just want to go back to the partnering situation. You're on the floor twice.
Yes.
I can't imagine that balance or harmony was struck with what I think has to be the sense of risk at the same time. And so did you do it through your own bodies, or did he sort of say in some way what he was aiming for? I mean, just in terms of movement.
Well, it's like he would say, when the young lady was doing the arabesque penché, he said, now, can you fall down? Can you get on your back? So then, to find the correct way of doing it, rather than just falling down, you have to put the knee under, roll over, but still keep the support. And so it was like experimentation rather than telling.
Okay.
And out of that, it would flow naturally. It's like like a balancing. And I remember him always saying, he says, you know, he always used the circus. Like if you were on a high wire, you couldn't, because you didn't feel well, you'd be dead. Or he said, you know, if we were in a laboratory, and I said, don't put these two things together because you explode and kill yourself.
Good way.
If you put that, you'd be dead. He said, must be boom. That's why I must practice, practice, practice to be exact. And so those things I kept in mind, so that whether one was feeling good, it was a matinee or the 10th week or the 12th week, it had to be exact.
So are you telling me that you counted all through the rehearsals?
Yes.
Right.
I'm a very good counter.
Right. And does he use counts, or did he use counts, or was it the dancers who did it through counts?
There's dancers counts and musicians counts.
Right.
And
what did he say to you? Do something on a certain count, or was that
no?
In your
I mean
own mind?
that was
That's
how
in your own mind.
We knew that if you had, instead of like 6 times 4 is 24. But Stravinsky would do a 10, a 5, and a 7. It all comes out to 24. But the step would be 10, 5, and 7. So you had to know that and trust, even though you felt you were going against the music, that you would end up on 24.
What do you mean you were going against the music?
Because it's like multiplication. 6 times 4 is 24. 2 times 12 comes out to 24. You can have 5 times 4 plus 4 comes to 24. But you can't have all those options. It's got to be.
But what were you saying to yourself, or did Balanchine ever use counts and to guide the dancers?
Well, no, he
I thought he did. I mean,
I would say, okay, we're going to do dancers counts to end up on 24.
That's right. And he wouldn't do that. No. Well, let's say this pas de deux, I mean, you were just supposed to feel the music, especially if the drops were thrown into the air and called notes, or because there's no melody as such, or did he actually say we have to count in order to be precise and end?
Well, the thing is that
8 or something.
Because it's syncopated, sometimes you cannot count it.
I see.
Like da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 da. So he said, take breath. Da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 da.
And how do you teach it or coach it to your
Same
dancers?
way. Da 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 dee da 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 da. Some people do su-su. They want to make a step. It's just a breath.
Well, but the precision, you know, I thought was admirable in the session we just saw. And so how did you get that into their bodies?
Well, it's becomes repetitive over and over and over again, making the artists think not what is comfortable to them, but what must be done. And so the changes come, and if someone doesn't really know the step, this becomes su-su, and they go up, and that's not it. Then they find that they're off. And
so you have to say they're off.
Yes,
Okay,
and so you tell the individual, no, 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 it's just a breath.
Did he start with the pas de deux in the entire ballet? I think
Yes.
Yes, right.
Yes.
So that was the kernel of the ballet,
Yes.
actually, and the essence of it was in
Yes.
that pas de deux. And can you just tell us whether he said anything to you before you both started on the floor? I mean,
No,
in the studio, did he say anything?
No, we just got a call, and I remember Betty Cage called, and she said, Mr. B wants to start a new ballet, and he wants you and Diana to come in. And I said, fine. And we just started moving and trying and doing. And so he would use that he used the time to experiment, to try, to fold, and to wrap around. And I think, again, the colors of the skin, see, like that contrast, but the symmetry had to be there, but the color combination also was a very integral part of it.
Well, I was going to talk about that later, but I mean, since you brought it up, I met a young man who was writing his PhD on the music for AGON, and I said to him, because he asked me a few questions, I said, don't forget, it was done in the same year as Little Rock. I mean, I know you've talked about this before, but I think since you brought up the difference in skin color, I think that he was aiming for something on various levels, and can you address that?
Well, I mean, we have to travel back almost 50 years. And when you think that I joined New York City Ballet in November of 1955, and how adventuresome and daring it was to take at that time the word was Negro, not African American, a young Negro, and put him in the company with everyone just dancing everything. And I remember the bombings and the things that were going on with Governor Falbus, and we did Nutcracker. And Mr. Balanchine changed all the choreography, almost like Sleeping Beauty. And I ended up winning the hand of the Sugar Plum. And he walked by and he said, I hope Governor Falbus is watching. But his mind was always involved with those things, but he was never overt about it. And also, I was fortunate to be able to sit with him and talk. Took him to Harlem. We went to jazz clubs. He loved tap dancing. And I started as a tap dancer, and introduced him to soul food because he loved to cook. Good. But all these things actually, how can I say it, worked so that there was a trust in him, so that it manifested itself in the choreography and in the partnering. The first thing he taught me in terms of partnering, he said, you know, when you take a horse and you see them training a horse, they walk them around the paddock like that. And that was my first sense of not me, but the ballerina and presenter. And you always see pictures of him like this. It's the presentation. But who and what are you presenting? Not yourself, but the ballerina or the step.
But I think he always had a very firm sense, from my conversations with him, of what he was doing, and I think he wanted to provoke with this ballet, and not just on a black-white issue, but just that this is not the kind of choreography that people thought of as classical ballet, and yet only classically trained dancers could do it. But when he added the black-white sort of equation, I don't think that shocked anybody in New York, but were you able to tour with it?
Yes. What it became the in thing to have AGON. It was so far ahead of its time, and everyone's afraid either to dance it. Even to this day, musicians,
it's true,
they go into a catonic fit when they know they have to play AGON. And I remember in the first pas de trois, where the two girls finished da ba be ba 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 ba, and he had just did a regular port de bras, and Mr. Stravinsky came and he said, George, you want 3 minutes and 2 seconds, or 3 minutes and 1 second? I mean, he was very precise. And he said, and I was like, oh God, there's somebody telling Mr. Balanchine what to do. He said, but you know, George, I think it'd be better if you did ba ba be ba 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 ba. And that was the first time I ever saw Mr. Balanchine change anything on the recommendation of someone else. But I would say that Mr. Stravinsky was to Mr. Balanchine like Mr. Balanchine was to me.
I think that's what I've heard, that the only person maybe that he would bow down to in some way was Stravinsky. And apropos of that, I mean, I just wonder if you can confirm, it seems to me today, and maybe it was always true, the four men at the end after the last note. And
yes.
That's what makes it so dynamic, is that they don't end with the music. They always make the last move after the music ends. And was that always true?
Yes, but again, that last step has changed.
That was my next question. We were going to talk about how AGON has changed,
right.
even when you were at City Ballet.
Yes.
And I do want to discuss that. So let's get into just that particular, those four men.
It was like,
right.
And, but it happens correctly when you do the steps before going the swing. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1. But if you do 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, then it looks wrong. So it's the swing. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And there's a breath. There's a breath. There's a breath. There's a breath. There's a breath.
A lot of the leotard ballets are seen by many people as avant-garde, abstract ballets. They look geometric. But I've always felt there's a lot of male-female relationships in them. It's abstracted in the old way that Martha Graham used to say, it's the thing itself. You abstract the essence of something. And depending on how this is danced, it can be a very sexy pas de deux. On the other hand, it can be equally passionate in a cool way. And so, can you tell me about that aspect?
Okay, if you remember after the dee da da dee da 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 dee da da dee da that they start that last adagio, and I remember distinctly that I had the young lady like this, and her arm, her leg was coming around, and I did this. He said, no, 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 that's too much. Just take the ankle.
Because it was too literal.
This is too, exactly right. He said, no, that's too sexy. Just this.
You wanted to be cool in all senses of the word today.
And, and it's, you forget how doing this and just that makes all the difference in the world. And this goes just beyond, it becomes tacky.
Good, you said it. I
it becomes tacky.
Right.
It's just like there's a point that you can go, but if you go beyond that, it's tasteless.
Right. But were you aware that it might be looked upon as a duet that had or did not have, depending on how it was danced, sexual connotations? We tend to look at these things as just movement. And on the other hand, I would warn anybody into reading too much into this stuff, because he was very concerned that people not make up stories when there were no stories. Lincoln Kirstein always saw all of AGON as a metaphor for tension and anxiety. So that, have you felt that one shouldn't overdo the sexual tension? It's in there.
Because it's all there. You don't have to add
built into the movement.
You don't have to add anything to it. Remembering the dances that it was done on. Diana Adams was always this elegant, classical, or classy woman. She wouldn't do that. And so, again, in the partnering and dancing with her, he respected that. Whereas when we did Slaughter on 10th Avenue, it was a whole other dynamic that he didn't want in AGON. But I think that also came from the fact of who he choreographed it for. And she had this elegant, this classical, elegant, but refined. Not a daredevil technique. And I think what has happened today, technique has gotten so advanced, it becomes an acrobatic rather than my making something about it. Like, you know, what's going to happen? But actually, when Diana did it, she was very nervous, and that was part of the tension of the pas de deux itself. You know, is she going to make it? Isn't she going to make it? Is she going to make it? I would always talk to my ballerinas.
And what did you say?
And I would say, you look beautiful tonight.
Oh, that's very nice.
See how beautiful you are?
Great.
And if you tell someone when they're dancing how beautiful they are, they become beautiful. And it's not how pretty you are. It's a difference. You're pretty.
It's inside.
You're beautiful. I said, and it gives you a it's like, I use the difference between silk and polyester.
Tell us more.
If you throw silk, it floats down. Polyester, it falls. So it's, you tell someone, let your arm come up and your fingers caress the air like smoke. Like Mr. Balanchine would say, round the palm of your hand. You can't literally round the palm of your hand, but it got you out of this.
Correct.
And so now in the schools, they'll give the boys a ball, they'll put the fingers like that, but still there's this tension in here rather than rounding the palm, and which is so important. Bah.
After you had learned the entire pas de deux in AGON, were you aware of what everybody else would be doing? You know, did he finish the pas de deux first and then go on to the trios?
Yes, yeah, he did the...
Or were they being done? In other words, you know, a pas de deux by itself is one thing, but when you see it, especially in that, it's very electrifying ballet. And did you know what everybody else would be doing finally, or you had to wait till you were on stage? And even so, you weren't out front, so...
Well, the thing is, though, he did the pas de deux, then he worked on the pas de trois, then the pas de trois, then we did the opening, and he called the men.
You had had the major part, and suddenly you were one of four, and all four you had to do your arabesque on your heels.
Right.
He used, you know, heel work a lot with the toe up, but mainly for women.
Well,
but after that, I started seeing it in men, that arabesque on a heel.
But you see, it's
very dynamic, but you have to be at the right angle.
But what it is, that's where the jazz technique comes in. It's really pulling off the leg.
But what about the rest
Well,
of
that's getting everyone to pull off the leg because they want to be placed and do an arabesque. He said, no, pull.
He actually said it.
Yeah, well, he would show it.
He showed it.
Yes. Then I would try to do it. He said, oh, that's what I want.
Okay.
And utilizing the different dances, but he would see someone that had the essence of what he wanted, and that's what he wanted the others to emulate.
But it just seemed to me that a lot of things, again, we take things for granted, that kind of mobile partnering and that kind of arabesque. In '57, it wasn't that common, even within Balanchine choreography. I may be wrong, but I mean,
if you even go,
how much of it was new to you in terms of movement? I mean, of course, we all know it's steps recombined or inverted.
right.
But nonetheless, how to do it is the problem.
But you could see even the essence of that if you go as far back as Apollo.
Yes, but it's
Or
on
Four
2
Temperaments.
feet. It's on 2 legs. That's the difference.
But it's that sense of, he said dancing was moving through time and space. He enjoyed the getting into and getting out of it,
Okay.
rather than being
good
on.
one. Okay.
And so consequently, you see that in everything that he does. And he establishes a theme. Now, like AGON, it's built on court dances. So you have to take a moment and think of how they were traditionally dressed. So it couldn't be light and bouncy. It had to be down, because if you think of the weight of what you were wearing. But this is why, I mean, in talking with him, going to a museum.
With him or without him?
Yes, or yes.
Why did he take dancers to museums, or
Well,
just you?
because he would talk about it. I said, oh, let's go see, or this show is going to happen, or going to see, had an orchestra play, and you would sit there, and then things would make sense to you all of a sudden, what he said or what he was trying to get to. And so you had to leave yourself open. But he loved jazz.
Well, people say that, but tell me in what way he loved jazz.
Because he loved the feeling that you were
I mean,
not
did he
placed.
How many times do you think he went to jazz? Did he go to small jazz clubs?
Oh, yes. We used to go up and hear Adam Clayton Powell's wife play. Hazel Scott.
Right.
Oh, yeah, he loved all that. But at the same time, most of your jazz pianists are classically trained, so therefore they can improvise.
Right.
So you've got to have that technique to free yourself. And so he used that in his dance. And he said, no, not quite right. But what we would do is that, knowing that we were doing this diverse choreography, we would still go back to the school every day and take traditional classes.
Oh, I hope. Right.
You know, and but in that sense of experimenting and going off, but you had to go back and get centered so you know what you were going off from.
Can you tell me, in your mind, the connection between Four Temperaments and AGON in some way? You know, it's in the same family tree, but the composers are different. But what about the movement?
I would say the ballet that taught me the most in terms of moving in AGON was Symphony in C.
Interesting. I believe you. Tell me why. And which
Well,
movement?
I see it's hard to talk about. I mean, I can get up and demonstrate it to you, but it's, again, da dee da 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 dee da da. If you do it da dee da 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 dee da da da, that's wrong.
That's
it's
too
off
square.
the leg, da 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 dee into the hip,
Okay,
using
the
that
third
jazz.
movement.
I did first and fourth.
You didn't do third?
No, that was Eddie did third. That was the
Well,
jumping one.
depends who was one. So you did first and fourth.
But everyone does all the same steps in the finale. But the first,
That's
da
true.
dee da 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 dee da 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 da. It's that,
Okay.
but that's where the jazz training came in. For me, having been in the court of ballet, the first things that I danced were Symphony in C, and that was my exposure to it. Then going into four T's, into phlegmatic, that was another step. But I'd already I understood the breaking down, so I was off-center rather than being on-centered. But even when you're off-center, you're still centered. You can do a tilt, but it's still centered.
Okay.
So if you take a triangle and tip it on the side, it's still centered. But a lot of people fall to the side and think that's a tilt. So if you take the triangle and just move it on the axis, so this way, it's still the triangle. Right. So that center still stays there.
And did you find you had, excuse me, a lot of that in the repertoire?
For me, yes. I mean, that's what was so exciting for me and why I wanted to dance in New York City Ballet.
This was dynamic.
Yes.
Right.
And understanding that I could be off-center but still being centered, you know. And but it also gave you a chance to, I like living on the edge. And so to be able to dance on the edge, and when you hit it, it's a sense of joy. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it.
Right.
You know, it's not, I'm dancing. Oh, that's it. And then you try to recapture that each time. It doesn't happen all the time, but when you do, you then spend the rest of your life trying to make it happen again. It's the perfect high. I just like to talk to him. And whatever, and the thing is that I would follow him around. I would listen to him. And Maria came to me, she said, listen to George, follow him around. I mean, I would go, even whether I had a costume fitting or not, to Madame Karinska's, and I would just sit there, and he would say this and that. So now I know how to make costumes. I'd watch him conduct, I'd watch him do rehearsals, but you start absorbing. But if you took the time to sit down and talk to him, he'd be the most giving.
That's true.
But I would say that I was very fortunate because I was hungry, like a sponge. You couldn't get enough. In fact, I can be an irritant because I'm like, oh. But that is my pleasure, but I think it also gave him pleasure. Anyone that wanted to learn, and he would give it to you.
That's true. Did you, at what point did you all find out you were going to be dancing in leotards?
Actually, it never even came up about what we were going to wear. It was just that we were leotards and tights.
Well, but that wasn't true of Apollo or
No, not
Orpheus.
initially. But I think, but, you know, also, I think in answer to that, by that time, what he wanted technique-wise was getting clearer and clearer and clearer. So it's like, what's the word, when you...
So stripping down?
Yeah, when you, not stripping down, but you condensing, or you're filtering through, so that you get, boom, basic, 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 basic. And the speed. He said, if I lived in another country, I probably would choreograph differently than I do now. He said, because I choreograph for the American kinetic energy, that speed. Now, living in New York is totally different than living in San Francisco or Atlanta. New York has an energy unto itself, and that is what I think he capitalized on. And but that coupled with the music, and then you think with Stravinsky going all the way back, it was all there, and it just came together. But
well, actually, AGON is one of the few scores that Stravinsky actually wrote for Balanchine. I think there's a myth that there is a collaboration on a literal level. They collaborated through the music, but I think there are only really 3 real ballet scores and a 4th in another production. And so this ballet was major because it was a true collaboration on a person-to-person level between Balanchine and Stravinsky, not through an existing score.
no.
And how much of Stravinsky's presence made a difference? Didn't he come in for a rehearsal?
By the time we got to the finale, Mr. Stravinsky came here, and that's when it came together. But even doing it to piano is totally different when you have the orchestra, because all the things that you were holding on to are gone, and something else is coming in its place. And that's where you have to be rock steady. And
I can imagine. And so when you heard the score, you heard it at a rehearsal?
yes, it was the dress rehearsal actually, and it was sort of like this moment, those moments of panic.
Like, what is this?
What is this? Because it's like, it was just like,
Exactly.
and everyone was like, oh my God, and that, you know. But again, this is the thing that always mystified me with Mr. Balanchine. In total chaos, he had this sense of calm, because he knew it would come together. And somehow it did. And but I think that is where the musicality comes in, and the awareness of the pulse and the rhythm and the beats and timing. It just, but you know, after taking his classes and working with him, there was muscular memory aside from intellectual memory. But I think that the ballet, I mean, still today, it was really the cutting edge in terms of what we call neoclassical dancing. It set the standard in what we perceive as neoclassical dancing today.
That is certainly the definitive statement.